Have you ever noticed how some days leave you feeling exhausted, even though nothing particularly difficult happened? No emergency, no crisis, no impossible deadline, just an ordinary day. And somehow, by the time evening arrives, you feel like you've been carrying something heavy that you can't quite name. Most people assume that's simply what adulthood feels like. I don't think it is. I think we're exhausted because almost nothing in modern life knows how to end. Yesterday's coffee cup is still waiting on the kitchen counter. The bed still looks like sleep never quite finished. A message you meant to answer follows you into the next morning. The sink quietly remembers the last person who used it. Even after you've stopped working, small pieces of yesterday keep asking for your attention. None of them is important, but together, they become the invisible weight of an ordinary life. The heaviest things we carry are often the ones that weigh almost nothing. Most people try to solve this by becoming more productive. They wake up earlier, buy a better planner, download another habit app. But what if the answer isn't doing more? What if it's allowing fewer unfinished things to quietly follow you through the day? Years ago, I began noticing something that kept appearing in Japanese homes. It wasn't expensive furniture. It wasn't minimalism. And it certainly wasn't that people there had easier lives. It was something much quieter. Very little seemed to compete for your attention. Nothing felt like it was pulling at you. The house wasn't asking anything from you. And over time, I realized that feeling wasn't created by one big idea. It was created by dozens of tiny habits so small that, on their own, they almost seem too ordinary to matter. Today, I'd like to share 8 of them. Not because they're uniquely Japanese, but because Japan has spent generations refining something many of us never learned: how to remove tiny pieces of friction before they quietly become unnecessary stress. Pay close attention to habit number 4. It completely changes the way most people think about energy and productivity. And stay with me until the final habit, because habit number 8 isn't really another habit. It's the quiet philosophy that gives meaning to every one of the others. By the end of this video, you probably won't have a different house, but I think you'll walk through your own home, and perhaps even through your own life, a little differently than you did before. At first, these habits may seem almost too small to matter. 30 seconds before getting out of bed, a few seconds at the sink, 10 quiet minutes before sleep. On their own, they hardly seem capable of changing a life. And that's exactly the point. Most of us have been taught that meaningful change should feel dramatic, a new routine, a complete reset, a better version of ourselves starting on Monday morning. We've all tried that, and most of us already know how that story usually ends. Not because we lack discipline, but because changing an entire life all at once asks too much from the human mind. Too much motivation, too much attention, too much of a person we haven't become yet. Japan has long approached change differently. There is a philosophy called Kaizen. It is often translated as continuous improvement, but the idea goes deeper than simply getting better. Kaizen begins with a simple question. What is the smallest change that can quietly become part of everyday life? Not the change that impresses people, the change that survives ordinary Tuesdays. That is why the habits in this video are intentionally small. They do not ask you to become someone new. They simply ask a little less from the person you already are. As I looked more closely, I realized something else. These 8 habits are not random. Each one quietly solves a different kind of invisible friction. Some habits close an open loop, finishing something before the mind keeps carrying it. Some protect the transition between one part of the day and the next, so yesterday doesn't quietly spill into today. Others prevent today's small actions from becoming tomorrow's unnecessary work. The morning habits protect the beginning of the day. The cleaning habits stop tiny bits of residue from quietly accumulating. The moments of rest protect your energy before exhaustion takes over. The evening habits allow the day to end instead of lingering into tomorrow. And underneath all of them is one quiet Japanese idea that we'll come back to later. Mottainai. The belief that something valuable should not be carelessly wasted. Not just food, not just objects, but attention, energy, time, even an ordinary day. These habits are inspired by Japanese ways of living, but they are not rules every person in Japan follows every day. They are practical ideas refined over generations, ideas that remain useful no matter where you live. Because small habits matter for a very simple reason. They don't ask you to become a different person. They gently change the direction of the person you already are. And the very first transition worth protecting begins before your feet even touch the floor. The first habit takes only 30 seconds. And in many ways, it may be the most important one on this list. Tomorrow morning, before you sit up, before you reach for your phone, before you begin thinking about emails, schedules, or everything waiting for you, do nothing. Just remain where you are for 30 quiet seconds. Not because those 30 seconds will magically change your life, but because they quietly decide how your day begins. During that brief moment, ask yourself one simple question. What is one small thing I'm willing to look forward to today? Not grateful for, not excited about, just willing. Maybe it's the first cup of coffee, a walk after dinner, a favorite breakfast, a conversation with someone you enjoy, a chapter of the book waiting on your nightstand, or simply 10 peaceful minutes before the house becomes busy. It doesn't need to be important. In fact, it's often better if it isn't. In Japan, there is a beautiful idea called ma. People often translate it as empty space, but that misses something important. Ma is not emptiness. It is meaningful space. The quiet interval that allows one experience to finish before another begins. You can see it in Japanese architecture, in gardens, in traditional music, even in conversation, where silence is often allowed to exist without needing to be filled. The moment between sleeping and waking deserves that same respect. It doesn't have to be claimed immediately by the outside world. Most mornings, however, we give that moment away, almost without noticing. The phone lights up. News arrives. Emails appear. Someone else's priorities enter our mind before our own thoughts have had the chance to wake up. The phone may only steal 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds quietly decide what enters your mind first. Your own intention, or everyone else's urgency. This habit is not about pretending every day feels wonderful. Some mornings won't. Some mornings are genuinely difficult. This isn't forced optimism, and it certainly isn't toxic positivity. On those mornings, don't search for something extraordinary. Simply ask yourself, what is one thing today that doesn't feel entirely bad? Sometimes that's enough, because protecting the first 30 seconds isn't really about creating happiness. It's about giving your own mind the chance to arrive before the rest of the world does. And once your mind has crossed into the day, the space around you should cross with it. The second habit isn't really about making your bed. It's about telling both your room and your mind that sleep has finished. In many Western homes, that might simply mean straightening the blanket, adjusting the pillows, and clearing the space beside the bed. Nothing elaborate. Just enough that the room no longer feels as though it's still waiting for you to come back to sleep. In a traditional Japanese home, the idea often goes even further. Many homes have long been designed so that one room serves several purposes throughout the day. At night, it becomes a bedroom. In the morning, The futon is folded and carefully put away. The very same room may then become a place for breakfast, for reading, for working, for welcoming guests. The room changes because yesterday's purpose has been completed. That simple idea is easy to overlook, but it quietly changes the way you experience your home. Every space sends your brain a message. When a room still looks like yesterday, part of your mind continues living there. When the objects of one moment are put away, the room changes its purpose, and your mind receives permission to change with it. That doesn't mean everything has to be perfect. It doesn't mean hospital corners, spotless sheets, or military discipline. It isn't a test of self-control. It is simply a gentle reset, a quiet way of saying, sleep is over. A new part of the day has begun. Psychologists sometimes describe this as closing an open loop. Instead of allowing one unfinished state to quietly follow you through the morning, you complete it before moving on. The action takes less than 2 minutes. But the feeling it creates lasts much longer, because a peaceful home isn't created all at once. It's created every time one part of life is allowed to end before the next one begins. And that same principle shows up again in the next habit. Only this time, it happens in the smallest room of the house. The third habit takes even less time than the first two. In fact, it usually takes no more than 4 or 5 seconds. After washing your hands, brushing your teeth, or finishing the dishes, take one cloth and wipe away the water that's left around the sink. One cloth, one movement, and then you're finished. At first, it almost sounds too simple to matter. But this habit isn't really about the sink. It's about refusing to leave behind work that someone very often, your future self, will have to finish later. In Japan, there is a practical idea often associated with Mizumawari, the areas of a home where water is constantly used. Kitchen sinks, bathroom counters, faucets, drains, bathing spaces. These places receive a little extra attention, not because they must look perfect, but because water has a quiet habit of turning tiny moments of neglect into much larger jobs. A few drops become water spots. Water spots become mineral stains. Soap slowly hardens. Moisture attracts dust. And before anyone notices, a task that once required 4 seconds now asks for 20 minutes. Japanese homes don't necessarily stay manageable because people clean harder. Very often, they stay manageable because small residue is removed before it has the chance to become visible work. That way of thinking reaches far beyond the sink. It quietly asks, can I finish this while it's still easy? This habit isn't about obsessive cleanliness. No one is asking you to polish every surface until it shines. The habit is finished when the next person can use the sink without inheriting the last person's unfinished task. That might be your spouse, your child, a guest, or simply the version of you who will return tomorrow morning. The real advantage isn't better cleaning. It's preventing small residue from quietly becoming future work. Because every unfinished task leaves behind something more than clutter. It leaves behind another tiny decision waiting for your attention. And not every kind of residue collects on a countertop. Some of it quietly collects inside the body. By the time most people feel exhausted, they're already late. Not because they worked too hard, but because they waited until their body had no choice but to stop asking politely. Modern life has taught us a strange lesson. If your energy drops, push harder. Drink another cup of coffee. Grab something sweet. Scroll for a few minutes. Keep going. And if you're still tired, assume you simply aren't disciplined enough. But your body doesn't experience the day as one long, uninterrupted stretch of energy. It moves in natural rhythms. periods of focus, followed by periods that quietly ask for recovery. The problem isn't that we become tired. The problem is that we've been taught to treat every moment of tiredness as something to defeat. Japanese living often approaches these quieter moments differently, not by doing less all day, but by respecting the natural transition between effort and recovery before exhaustion makes the decision for you. This habit is surprisingly simple. Sometime between late morning and early afternoon, step away for 10 or 15 quiet minutes. Sit somewhere comfortable. Close your eyes if you like, or simply soften your gaze. Breathe slowly. Do nothing that asks your mind to solve another problem. Most importantly, leave your phone somewhere you can't reach it, because scrolling is not rest. It only replaces the demands of your work with the demands of someone else's information, news, opinion, message, image, comparisons. Your body may be sitting still. Your attention is not. Real rest asks for something different. It asks for fewer inputs, not different ones. This isn't laziness. It doesn't require sleep. And it certainly isn't permission to avoid meaningful work. Think of it as creating just enough quiet for your nervous system to catch up with the life you've already lived that morning. If you'd like to try it tomorrow, keep it simple. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Put your phone out of reach. Close your eyes or simply let them rest on one place. Don't make plans. Don't solve problems. Don't even try to relax. Just stop adding new demands. Then, when the timer ends, stand up and continue your day. Many people discover something surprising. The afternoon didn't become easier because they forced themselves to work harder. It became easier because they finally stopped fighting their own biology. The afternoon dip isn't always a failure of discipline. Sometimes it's simply a biological request you've been trained to ignore. And once your mind has stopped receiving constant demands, the next habit gives your nervous system something it has quietly been missing all day. By the middle of the day, something else has usually happened. Your attention has become crowded. Emails, notifications, conversations, deadlines, screens. Even when you've been sitting still, your mind has been moving nonstop. That's why the fifth habit asks you to do something surprisingly simple. Go outside, not to exercise, not to be productive, not to accomplish another goal before coming back inside. Just go outside. Stay there for about 15 minutes if you can. And for once, allow the world to exist without asking anything from you. In Japan, many people are familiar with the idea of Shinrin-yoku, often translated as forest bathing. Despite the name, it isn't really about hiking, it isn't exercise, and it isn't about reaching a destination. Its central idea is much quieter. Allow the nervous system to receive the natural world without demanding a result from the experience. You don't have to find a forest tomorrow, a neighborhood park, a quiet street, a backyard. Even a tree outside your apartment window can be enough. What matters isn't where you are, it's how you pay attention. Here's a simple exercise. Notice one thing you can see, perhaps leaves moving in the wind, or sunlight slowly shifting across a wall. Then notice one thing you can hear, a distant bird, traffic fading into the background, children laughing somewhere you can't quite see. Finally, notice one thing you can physically feel, the cool air on your hands, the warmth of sunlight on your face, a light breeze against your skin, or perhaps something we almost never notice anymore, the simple absence of a ceiling above your head. That's enough. No photos, no podcast, no checking messages, no turning the moment into another achievement. This habit isn't exercise. although walking is perfectly welcome. And it isn't a reward you earn after finishing all your work. In many ways, it's one of the reasons you're able to do that work well in the first place. Outside is not a reward for productivity. It is one of the conditions that allows healthy productivity to exist. Some days, 15 minutes won't be possible. That's okay. Stand on your balcony, walk once around the building, step outside the front door, or simply open a window, leave your phone behind, and spend 2 quiet minutes noticing the air moving around you. Small moments count. Because your nervous system rarely asks for something dramatic. It usually asks for something real. The day has now been entered, worked through, paused, and experienced. But before it comes to an end, there is one more question your mind needs help answering. What part of today is worth keeping? As the day comes to an end, there's one final question worth asking yourself. Not about everything you finished. Not about everything you still have left to do. Just one simple question. What was one moment today I don't want to forget? Notice that the question isn't, what was the best part of my day? And it isn't, what am I grateful for? Those are good questions. This one is quieter, because some days aren't especially happy. Some days are frustrating. Some are exhausting. Some simply feel ordinary. And yet, even an ordinary day almost always contains one moment worth keeping. It might be the way the morning light fell across your kitchen table, a conversation that made you feel understood, the relief in your chest after finally pressing send on an email you had been avoiding, the sound of someone laughing in the next room, a quiet meal, or 5 peaceful minutes when, for once, nothing was asking anything from you. Psychologists have long studied simple reflection exercises, including one often called 3 good things. But after a long day, you don't need 3. Sometimes, 1 is enough. The purpose isn't to convince yourself the day was wonderful. It's to stop difficulty from becoming the only thing your mind remembers. Because memory isn't an objective recording of everything that happened. It's shaped, little by little, by what you repeatedly notice. That's why the details matter. Instead of saying, I finished my project, try remembering, I still remember the feeling of relief in my chest when I finally pressed send. One records an event, the other preserves an experience. This habit isn't about ignoring pain. It doesn't erase disappointment. It doesn't pretend difficult days don't exist. A day can contain grief, frustration, fatigue, and still offer one quiet moment worth carrying forward. On your hardest days, make the question even smaller. Ask yourself, what was one moment today that wasn't quite as difficult as the rest? Sometimes that's all your mind needs, because every evening, whether you notice it or not, your brain is deciding what today's story will become. Memory is not only a record of what happened, it is also a record of what you repeatedly chose to notice. By now, your mind has one moment worth keeping. Now your home deserves one final act of closure before tomorrow begins. By the end of the day, most homes don't become overwhelming because of one big mess. They become overwhelming because of hundreds of tiny decisions that were postponed, a coffee cup left on the table, a sweater draped over a chair, mail waiting to be opened, shoes left by the door, a dish that I'll wash later. None of these feels important until tomorrow morning arrives, and all of them ask for your attention at once. That's why the 7th habit isn't about cleaning your home. It's about making a quiet promise to tomorrow's version of yourself. Before you go to bed, spend no more than 10 minutes returning the visible space around you to a simple, resting state. Notice I said visible. Not every drawer, not every closet, not every cupboard, Leave those alone. Only look at what your eyes immediately land on: a cup, a plate, a jacket, a cushion, a few papers, something left on the floor. Put them back where they belong. Then stop. Don't reorganize the kitchen. Don't deep clean the bathroom. Don't turn 10 minutes into an hour. The purpose isn't to create a perfect home. The purpose is to make tomorrow morning ask a little less from you than today did. One idea I especially like is what I think of as the 3-object rule. On nights when you're exhausted, forget about the timer. Simply put away 3 visible objects. Clear 1 small surface. Then stop. You succeeded. Because habits survive not when they're perfect, but when they're still possible on your hardest days. Most overwhelming homes aren't created in one afternoon. They are created by tiny, unfinished decisions quietly accumulating over weeks. A 10-minute reset prevents those tiny decisions from becoming an entire weekend's worth of work. This habit isn't about cleaning your house every night. It succeeds the moment tomorrow's version of you walks into a room that feels just a little easier to enter. A good evening reset should make tomorrow easier, without making tonight harder. Tomorrow's version of you should never have to clean up every 5-second decision you made today. By now, you've probably noticed something. These 7 habits don't actually have much in common on the surface. One is about waking up. Another is about a sink. Another asks you to step outside. Another helps you remember your day. Yet, somehow, they all seem to move in the same direction. That's because underneath all of them is one quiet decision. And Japanese culture has a beautiful word for it. Throughout this video, we've talked about beds, sinks, windows, morning routines, moments of rest, small memories. They may have seemed like 8 completely different habits, but they all come from one quiet decision. And there is a beautiful Japanese word that captures it: Mottainai. People often translate it as a feeling of regret when something valuable is wasted. Food, objects, materials, natural resources. That is its traditional meaning. But over time, many people have also found something larger inside the idea, not because the word changed, but because life did. Today, perhaps the things we waste most easily are no longer objects. They are moments, attention, energy, peace, tomorrow's effort. Think back to the habits we've explored. The first 30 seconds of your morning, a room still waiting to become today's room, a sink asking tomorrow to finish today's work, an exhausted body quietly asking to be heard, a patch of sky above your head. One small memory before sleep, a room made slightly easier for tomorrow's version of you. None of these moments seems important while they are happening, and that is exactly why they disappear so easily. Mottainai gently asks a different question. What valuable thing am I allowing to pass through my life without ever really receiving? Notice that the question isn't, how can I get more out of today? It's much quieter than that. It's simply, how can I lose less of today? Because the goal was never to optimize every minute. Trying to turn every moment into another productivity project would only create the very pressure these habits were meant to remove. The goal is something much gentler. To become present in the places where life is usually lost. 4 seconds at the sink, 30 seconds before the phone, 10 quiet minutes in the afternoon, 1 remembered moment before sleep. A lighter life rarely arrives all at once. It is built almost invisibly, one completed moment at a time. And before we finish, I'd like to leave you with a small invitation. Don't try all 8 habits tomorrow. Choose only one. Not the one that sounds the most impressive. Choose the one your life has been quietly asking for. Live with it for the next 3 days. Notice what changes. Then come back and tell us. Not whether your life became perfect, only whether it became a little lighter. Because that is how Kaizen has always worked, not through dramatic transformations, but through small moments repeated with quiet intention. Japan is not a country without stress, overwork, or difficult days. These habits don't exist because life there is perfect. They exist because every culture eventually discovers small ways of carrying life's weight a little more gently. Perhaps that is the real lesson. Not to become more disciplined, not to become more productive, but to become someone who leaves a little less unnecessary weight for tomorrow. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again in the next one.